All right, kids, we're going to pick back up with the second part of Chapter 4, Section 1, which is talking about uh, the growing discontent of the American colonies with Great Britain. And what do I mean by discontent? Discontent is as y'all would say, is a big word. It's a way of saying that you're not happy anymore. If you're content, you're happy. If you're discontent, you're not happy. So the colony is going to be growing ever increasingly discontented with the British. Okay, so why does this happen? Well, this happens because people don't like being told what they can and can't do. I mean, y'all know that. You're teenagers. You don't like being told what to do. We've seen that all across our country this year. People don't like being told what they can and can't do. I mean, we saw it just with simple things like with the pandemic and being told to wear a mask, and people don't like being told to do that. Well, here's another example of people not liking what they're told, even though what they're being told to do was for the greater good. All right, let's look at it. So in 1763, Native Americans began to unite with one another to fight against the American colonists and the British. 1763, Chief Pontiac, chief of the Ottawa people, united several tribes to go to war with the British. And the British didn't want more wars with Native Americans. So, in order to prevent more warfare with Native Americans, they issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which told the colonists, you can't settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. All right, here's this natural border that we don't want you to go across, because if you go across this border, you're going to create more conflicts with Native Americans. And it made colonial farmers angry because, as we've discussed in our previous lessons, what increased your influence in society, particularly in the southern colonies? It was land ownership, right? The more land you owned, the higher up in society you could go. So when the British limited Western settlement of the colonists, it made them angry. They don't like being told what to do, remember? If you look at this map, we have the British colonies. And even though Great Britain now controls this territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, the colonists are being told that they can't settle in this new territory. Well, the colonists aren't going to take kindly to that. All right. The other thing that makes the colonists angry is that the British are asking them to pay more of a share in taxes. Okay. The British were in debt following the French and Indian War, and George Grenville, the British Prime Minister, began to tax the colonies to help pay for this debt. Okay. Now, we've talked about the various ways that the British taxed the colonies. The biggest way that they were taxed was with imports and exports. Goods that were put on ships and brought into the colonies and goods that left the colonies. Well, how did the colonists combat those taxes? They combated it with smuggling, right? Well, part of Grenville's plan is to send smugglers up into Nova Scotia, which is in modern-day Canada, uh, for trials where they're put on trial not in front of a jury of their peers, but in front of Navy officers who are unsympathetic towards their struggles and are probably going to give them harsh sentences for their smuggling. All right, so Grenville's plan is to tax the colonies through imports and exports and crack down on smuggling to help pay for this French and Indian War that we just got finished fighting. All right. Now, he even tries to do this in a nice way. All right. What I mean is, he says to himself and he says to others, if we actually lower the rates of taxes, people might be more willing to pay those taxes, right? And so that's what they're going to eventually do. They're eventually going to lower the rates of taxes to encourage colonists to actually pay the taxes. But they're actually going to enforce the customs duties more so than they ever have before. So in other words, they're going to lower the tax, but they're going to make sure that everybody pays the tax. And that's going to make the colonists very, very mad. The first of these new taxes that they're going to issue on the colonists are the Sugar Act. The sugar tax placed new taxes on silk, wine, coffee, pimento, and indigo, and changed the tax rates on raw sugar and molasses. The colonists started to latch on to the English Bill of Rights and the philosophies of John Locke by saying, we are being taxed without our consent. We don't have representation in Parliament, yet we're being taxed. That is not right. Okay. Another thing that made them mad was the Currency Act of 1764. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I'm going to talk to you guys about money. Money is, money rules the world. Money makes the world go round. A lot of people like talking about money. Well, paper money is an interesting thing, right? Because paper money doesn't really, it's not really worth anything. Like, it's literally not worth the paper that it's printed on, except that people have confidence in paper money. And what I mean is, I know that if I leave a $100 bill laying in my classroom on my desk and I walk out of the room, somebody's going to take that $100 bill. Why are they going to take it? Well, they're going to take it because they know that they can use that $100 bill for stuff that they want, right? They can take that $100 bill to a vendor and they can buy a pair of shoes with it. They can buy a video game with it. They can buy some clothes with it. And why is that vendor willing to take that $100 bill? Because they can take that $100 bill and they can buy stuff with it. Now, it's not that the $100 bill is actually worth anything. The clothes are worth something. The shoes are worth something. The video game is worth something. Well, not really, but sort of. But the money itself is only a slip of paper that I'm willing to accept because I know other people are willing to accept it too. All right. And I know that sounds like a confusing way to talk about it, but it's not. It's just the paper's just not worth anything. And it actually loses value. Okay. This is economics 101, but the more you have of something, the less it's worth. Okay. If you don't learn anything else from this lesson, write that down. The more you have of something, the less it is worth. That even includes money. And what I mean by that is the more money that we have out there in circulation, the less that money is actually worth, right? Like a lot of you think about problems that we have in the world. You think about poverty. You think about, why don't we just print money and give it to people, right? I mean, let's just give everybody $1 million and then nobody would be poor anymore. The problem with that is when you put more money into the market, the only thing that's going to happen is vendors are going to start to charge more money for their products, right? Because ultimately what we have is we've got products that are scarce, right? And that scarcity is what drives the price of those products. So if I just printed off $1 million and just gave it to everybody, then we would just go to McDonald's and there wouldn't be a value menu anymore. There wouldn't be a dollar, pay $1, get a hamburger. There would be pay $100, get a hamburger. Okay. Money loses value over time. To give you another idea of this, when I was y'all's age, when I was in high school, the convenience store across the street from my high school, I could go to the convenience store and I could buy a 20-ounce Coke and a bag of chips, right? And that 20-ounce Coke would have cost me 60 cents. When you guys go across the street to buy a 20-ounce Coke, it probably costs you $1.79, $1.69, like, and that's because money has lost value over time because we've printed more money. That's a process called inflation. All right. And I know that I was rambling and I know I talked too long about it, but when money loses value, that's called inflation. And to slow inflation, Parliament had banned the use of paper money in the colonies. Well, the colonists liked paper money. And the reason they liked paper money is because, for that very reason, it lost value over time. So what they would do, colonial farmers would borrow money. And then when they would pay that money back, the money had actually lost value, right? So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. If I borrow $100 today and I agree that I'm going to pay you back your $100 2 years from now, right? Then the $100 that I pay you back 2 years from now is actually worth less than the $100 I borrowed from you 2 years before. Now, we have things in place today that protect people from this, that protect the people loaning money, things like interest, right? So now if you borrow money, you don't just pay back the money you borrowed, you pay back the money you borrowed plus interest. Well, they didn't do that back then, and that made colonial farmers mad when they banned the use of paper money. All right. This is going to be a major issue here, which is the first direct tax that the colonies had ever had to pay, the Stamp Act. All right, the Stamp Act was passed in 1765, and it was a direct tax. I'll come back to what that means in just a second. But it was a direct tax on anything that was printed in the colonies. All right. So what's a direct tax? A direct tax is one that you know you are paying. You are paying it directly, right? Versus an indirect tax is one that, as a consumer, you may not even know that you're paying. So, what I mean is, let's take a tax on imported goods, right? So, a company imports goods from another country. We'll say that they're importing tea from another country, right? Well, the company pays the tax to import the tea, and then they raise their prices on that product to recover the cost of that tax. So then you walk into the store as a consumer and you buy the tea. Well, it just has a price on it, and you walk back out the door. You don't even know it, but you paid the tax because the company had to increase the price of the item to cover their taxes that they paid when they imported the goods. A direct tax, on the other hand, is one you know you're paying. So think of a direct tax like a sales tax at the store. You go to the store, you buy something, it tells you that it's $1, but when you go to the register, you pay like $1.09. And that's because you know you're directly paying a sales tax. All right. That's what the stamp tax was. It was a direct tax. The colonists knew that they were being taxed, and it made them very, very angry. Um, this tax, along with the Quartering Act, which required the colonists to provide housing for British troops, which is something that they thought they were protected against under the English Bill of Rights, made them so mad that they signed a non-importation agreement, meaning that they would boycott British goods. Now, we all know what a boycott is. A boycott is when you just refuse to buy something that comes from Great Britain. This is the original cancel culture right here. Angry colonists were mad that the British were raising taxes on them, so they tried to cancel British goods, right? To show their power in the colonies, saying, look, y'all are just being unruly, spoiled colonists, and we actually have all the control. Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, which said that they had the power to make laws in the colonies. Well, they already had the power to make laws in the colonies. This is just a symbolic gesture to remind the colonists that, yes, look, the British are still in control. Okay. Now, even more taxes come down the pipeline in 1767 with the Townshend Acts. Okay. The Revenue Act of 1767 placed new taxes on glass, lead, paper, paint, and tea. Colonists continued to smuggle. To crack down on the smugglers, the British used something called writs of assistance. Writs of assistance are general search warrants that were used to take away people's property without due process. So, if I want to arrest you and search you and all that jazz, usually you have to have a warrant to do so. Warrants are not issued except on an individual basis, right? So, like, I have to have a warrant for you specifically. What a writ of assistance is it's a general search warrant where I don't have to have a warrant for you specifically anymore. I just have to have a warrant to search any ship in the shipyard, right? Well, that's pretty much violating your rights to privacy because people are searching your property without an individual warrant, right? And then they're confiscating goods without due process. You haven't been arrested, you haven't been put on trial, your property is just taken away from you. As the colonists continued to get angry, we see ideas start to spread, like John Dickinson's Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer, which continued to stress the idea of no taxation without representation. Okay. Boycotts continue. And then social unrest begins, like major social unrest. We have groups of people like the Sons of Liberty, led by Sam Adams, that spring up and start to protest, start to speak out against the British openly and vocally, start to do things that are even questionable legally, like they start to harass British tax collectors. They start to really and truly, the Sons of Liberty start to engage in activities that you couldn't get away with today. Even amongst all the social unrest that we've recently seen, we haven't seen anything like what the Sons of Liberty used to do. Okay. The Sons of Liberty used to harass British tax collectors. They would even resort to physical violence where customs officials would be taken out of their homes and tarred and feathered, for example. Being tarred and feathered means that they pour hot tar all over your body and then dump feathers on you in an attempt to mock you or make fun of you, humiliate you. But being tarred and feathered was very dangerous. If you think about it, you're pouring hot tar on somebody, you're going to be uh, burning them. You're going to be, damaging their skin, third degree burns, all that kind of stuff. So, Sons of Liberty did some questionable activity, but it's a sign of the times and a sign that the colonies were very much tired of British taxes. Okay. Now, understanding the mood in Boston, the Sons of Liberty and other groups, people who had been protesting, led to an event where a young man by the name of Christopher Cedar, or Cider, I'm not real sure how to say his name, ended up losing his life. A large crowd had gathered outside of the home of Ebenezer Richardson, who was a British Customs Service employee. The crowd was throwing things at his house. They had broken a window with rocks. And he stepped outside to defend his home with a gun. And he fired into the crowd. And unfortunately, this young man, Christopher Cedar, was 11-year-old boy who was shot and killed, who was in amongst that crowd. And you can imagine what the mood was like in Boston when this happened, right? You got a group of people who are tired of the British government, tired of British taxes, that they're openly going after people who are collecting those taxes and who are in charge of looking for smugglers. And then this young boy is killed in the process. You can imagine what the mood was like and how high the tensions were in Boston. So you can understand that when March 5th, 1770 rolled around, things were ready to explode, and they did. A group of colonists gathered to protest in front of a British customs house. We're actually going to look at two separate accounts of the Boston Massacre. One will be from these colonists who were gathered, and one will be from a British officer. And I'm going to ask you guys to read both accounts and determine who's telling the truth and who's not, and whether the truth is in the middle. But a few things that are definitely true is that the colonists threw things at the British soldiers. Now, whether or not the colonists were armed, whether or not the colonists only had snowballs and maybe a rock or two or some eggs or something, that's open for debate. But one thing that is true is that they threw things at British soldiers. The British soldiers claimed that they were fearful for their lives, and they opened fire on that crowd of colonists. And they ended up killing 5 people, and 6 others were wounded. The first of those people to die was a man that went by two names. He went by Michael Johnson, but he also went by Crispus Attucks, and he was the first person killed at the Boston Massacre. Now, was it actually a massacre, or was it just, British soldiers defending themselves? Once again, that's open for debate. But the colonists viewed it as a massacre, and they viewed it as yet another example of the British tyranny that was going on in the Americas. In response to this, the British repealed the Townshend Acts, but they left a tax on tea. All right, so you know what's probably going to happen next. This is some propaganda in the colonies. And I remember, when I use the word propaganda, I don't mean negative or positive. Propaganda is a tool that is used to try to influence the way you think. Propaganda is amoral. It's not immoral. It's not moral. It's amoral. It just means that we're going to use tools to try to influence the way you think. You see it all the time. And this was propaganda used by Paul Revere to show what was going on during the Boston Massacre. Now, when you see an image like this, let's break down what we're looking at. We see British soldiers here being led by Captain Thomas Preston here. And they have their guns with fixed bayonets. They are pointing into a crowd of people. They are organized and opening fire. And you look at the crowd of people here, they look defenseless. There's people laying on the ground dead. There's people yelling stop. There's people running away. Nobody in this picture has a weapon. That is something that will be disputed by the British soldiers. They will claim that the colonists were armed, that they had sticks and knives and hatchets and all kinds of weapons, and that they were only defending themselves. And the colonists will claim that they had not so much as a stick to defend themselves. Where do you think the truth lies? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, right? But this is the image that Paul Revere circulated to try to convince people that the British were just tyrants that were willing to kill colonists for no good reason. He even changed the name of buildings, of this building in the image. This was not called Butcher's Hall, but you can see here that Paul Revere calls it Butcher's Hall, and it's the only name on any building that you see in the image. And why did he choose the name Butcher's Hall? Well, because the British are butchering American citizens, right? Now, I can't wait for you guys to read these different accounts, because we can say for certain that Paul Revere's account of the Boston Massacre is certainly an exaggerated image. This is not what happened, but this is what they are going to circulate throughout the colonies to show what happened. Okay? And man, what a time to be talking about, propaganda and fake news, as they call it. Most of the time, you have to consider the source of the material that you're looking at, right? And I just want to make sure that you guys grow up to learn how to do that, because we've got a lot of people that don't know to look at the source of material that they're looking at. This is an image from a patriot who was very, very passionate about the fact that he felt that the British were tyrants. So, of course, he's going to paint an image here of the British being just savage murderers. Is that true? Probably not. Okay. But you have to consider the source anytime you look at an image or read something. And so that's why I can't wait for you guys to see the contrasting accounts of what happened on March 5th, 1770. Okay. That's it for today. We'll pick back up next time, and I hope you guys are having a great day, and I hope you have a great weekend.